Ladies and gentlemen, a huge welcome to Cambridge Judge Business School tonight for what is going to be a very dynamic Enterprise Tuesday, where I'm surrounded with three gentlemen. We love gender diversity at Cambridge Judge Business School. So I'm the token woman, and we have three amazing men on our panel. And we had a little chat, and we decided to actually break some rules. And we're going to allow you to ask questions during the session, not just at the end, because very often people forget their questions. But I'll be very strict in moderating, and if your question is going to take too long, I'll ask you to park it to the end. Okay? We're not expecting a fire alarm. We're not testing the alarm tonight. There is no scheduled fire test. So if you hear the fire alarm, please use the exits at the top or at the bottom of the lecture theater and assemble at the front on the lawn. Another very important housekeeping rule is that mobile phones can be very disruptive. If you're using your devices to tweet about tonight, feel free. If you're using your devices to email, I suggest going to Brown's. And if your phone rings, there is a £500 fine. Usually it's £50, don't laugh. Usually it's £50, but actually today is Giving Tuesday. Does anyone know that today is Giving Tuesday? So I didn't know. I found out as I was giving the brief for this that today is known as Giving Tuesday, or a detox for the soul after Black Friday. So before we begin, I wanted to talk to you about CAMFED. CAMFED is a very ambitious campaign for the education of women, and Cambridge Judge Business School has partnered with CAMFED, and it's a very inspirational initiative. As you can hear, I am not British. And when people ask me where are you from, I say that I'm French. But once upon a time, before my parents immigrated to France, I actually was born in the Middle East. And here we first world problems, as my children would say. Depending on your postcode, you get a great or less great NHS treatment. In the Middle East, it's the same, but not with healthcare, but more with the future of girls. I was incredibly lucky in the sense that I was born in a family that really believed in education. My parents were gender blind, really gender blind, and they educated me as well, if not better, than my brother. My sisters are equally well educated, and actually my brother is the underachiever in the family. And it's really important because I know that it's not always the case, and it's not a rule. CAMFED is here to make sure that girls all over the world, but especially in sub-Saharan Africa, are actually educated. And today, I'm asking you to actually help stop child marriage and to support CAMFED. Because CAMFED is such an amazing charity, the UK government has actually chosen CAMFED as one of the few charities where they will match any donation that you make. So there are posters all over. I'm just asking you to be generous. So I am going to lead by example and put something in here. And I hope lots of you will do the same at the end. But if you are not carrying any cash, if you only have bitcoins, look at their website and try and find a way of donating. And I know I said I was going to take only a couple of minutes to do this. I'm not a representative of CAMFED. I just think that this is an absolutely amazing initiative, and I really hope a lot of you are going to be supporting. Okay, so without any further ado, let's talk about teams. Are you excited? I am excited to hear about the amazing journey of these three young men, and we are going to start with introducing ourselves. So I'm going to start being the token woman. I'm the token woman here at the Judge Business School. I'm the director of the Accelerate Cambridge program and the executive director of the Entrepreneurship Center, and I will spend all day talking about gender imbalance in Cambridge and all over the world. And I can see one of my colleagues at the back laughing because he lives this on a daily basis. What about you, Ed? Who are you?
Who am I? My name's Ed Newton-Rex, and I guess really, I still consider myself a composer. So my background is in classical music. I came here, I was at King's down the road. I was in the choir as an undergrad, did a lot of singing. In fact, with the co-founder of my startup, we were both countertenors in the choir. And yeah, my kind of whole background was in composing music, composing choral music, singing, that sort of thing. Studied music here, where I did kind of mostly music theory. Really, I mean, you can see I was kind of basically determined to be a pop star for most of my life, and then somehow that didn't happen because I got distracted by the world of tech and the world of startups, and I ended up accidentally starting a business, and that's why I'm here today.
Thank you very much, Ed. Dom.
I am Dom. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks for the introduction, Hanadi. I'm probably most easily defined as a sports fan and a pint drinker, and I've managed to end up in a business that combines those two things very well, which is convenient. I'm also, like Ed, a failed countertenor. So I sang at St. Paul's Cathedral when I was 7, and then down the road at St. John's as a choral scholar, where I read theology. I'm suppose these days an entrepreneur, but also a very, very poor part-time chef. I have a supper club called Vicarage and Sons, which is based on my upbringing as the son of a priest, which perhaps makes sense, therefore, why I studied theology at university, just because if you're going to listen to your dad give sermons every Sunday, you might as well make it come good and give you a head start in your degree when you turn up at university. And I guess that in terms of where that degree has brought me, I'm really, really interested in not just religion and faith per se, but in the relationship that it has between other social sciences, so psychology, anthropology, sociology, and therefore really interested, particularly at the moment, in how different social sciences play a role in the foundation and building of a team, particularly with ritual and culture, and that's something which I'm really privileged to be able to think about and try to execute on a daily basis.
Great. Jon.
Amazing. So I guess I'll start by saying I can't sing. I think famously my sister told me, Jon, you're in tune, but you just don't sound very good. So I wasn't a countertenor. But I did study here, and I studied natural sciences, specialized in physics. I think I was always fascinated by trying to understand the world around us, and I guess kind of thinking about kind of big questions and I guess that led to kind of fascination with just different areas. And I think when it came to kind of choosing a career path, I got drawn towards going to the civil service. And I think really my fascination there was, again, around thinking about big questions and big problems that affect society, and seeing kind of government and working there as a means to have that kind of impact. We're not allowed to talk about our businesses here in the intro, but I think it was there really that I then ended up getting drawn into technology by an idea I had whilst I was working there, and that's really what the last kind of 10 years of my life have been dominated by. In the meantime, also got married, I became a father a year ago, so that's a really big change as well. I'm becoming a parent, and I've also lived between Cambridge, moved to London, ended up in Silicon Valley for a few years, and I've actually just recently moved back to Cambridge about a year ago.
Thank you very much, Jon. And just because we're disruptive, tell us about your business.
So yeah, I set up a company in 2008 called SwiftKey. So essentially the idea was just typing. It was just very, very bad on smartphones. This is 2008, so a long, long time ago. The iPhone had just come along in 2007. I was working in the civil service. I was taking minutes in a big board meeting with 25 people, and saw a kind of lawyer typing on a BlackBerry kind of like this. And there's just something about that moment which just gave me the idea we can do better than this. And so SwiftKey came out of trying to make typing better, and then trying to get as many people as possible to use our technology.
Great, thank you. So sports fan, pint drinker, and a student in theology. What kind of business can you come up with, Dom?
So at MatchPint, we believe that watching sport together with mates is one of the most exhilarating social experiences you can have, unless you don't like sport, in which case it's probably not. But for a large number of people, and particularly for people like myself and my co-founder Leo, that is a big part of our lives. And growing up at school together, that was a big part of our lives. So Leo, who's my co-founder, is half French and half Scottish, which is a terrible combination for a co-founder because he combines the anger of the Scots with the arrogance of the French, which is very, very difficult to... this isn't public, is it, the filming? Right.
And I'm finished, so you've just offended me.
Okay, that's double bad. Okay. That's what we believe, and we deliver at base a really, really simple product for people like us, sports fans. So if you want to find a pub near you that is showing a match that you want to watch, whether that is Premier League football, the Ashes, if there's somewhere open at 8 o'clock in the morning, NFL on a Sunday night, we will help you find a pub near you showing the game. And that is built on, underneath the bonnet, quite a lot of stuff that goes on. So really our kind of business proposition is based on a platform that we provide for pubs across the country where they can organize, market, and measure the success of sport in their pubs. It's an area with very little technology. You know, if you think that restaurants are kind of just about embracing technology now, think 10 years behind that for pubs. So, believe it or not, a pub finder is seen as genuinely innovative in our industry, which I think should make our life easy, but doesn't. And then finally, once you've got those two things together, so you've got a load of sports fans wanting to find a load of pubs, there are a number of brands and companies that are very interested in taking part in that conversation or that journey. So we then work with a number of mainly drinks brands, but also sports teams and sports leagues and increasingly other brands that want to have an association with sports to help them join in that conversation, reach sports fans, improve their user journey, whether that is providing great content like quizzes when you get into the pub that are sponsored by Guinness ahead of the rugby, or perhaps during the Premier League it's coming into your local pub 4 games in a row and getting a free pint of Carling on your 5th visit or something like that. So in a nutshell, it's kind of a network of sports fans, pubs and brands that are coming together around that experience of sharing an offline occasion but delivered through an online product.
Thank you very much, Dom. And Ed, before I ask you to talk about your business, I've got a surprise for you. Well, actually, Sophia has a surprise for you. So this is a video that I use on a regular basis in my teaching.
Music that reacts to the
Please go ahead.
action in the game there.
Oh my God.
The speed
That's
they're
good.
running at, and we think that idea is really, really exciting. Now, we want to do a demo for you, but we don't just want to show you the site in action because we think you can go and check it out in your own time. So we're actually going to do something a bit different. I think this might be a first for the web, I'm not sure. I'm actually going to do a duet accompanied by Jukedeck's music. The rest of this pitch, that's how I'm going to do it. I hope you enjoy it. This is a duet between man and machine.
What was I thinking?
It's really good.
Thanks.
Composed note for note by our software.
The music's got a bit better, to be fair.
These notes you hear were never written by hand. They were not penned by woman or man. They were unplanned, chosen by a program that I ran when this pitch began. They'd never been heard when I got on stage. This is the first
Come on.
time that they've been played.
I don't think we should.
Come on, come on. Thank you.
There
So,
we go.
well done. So you wanted to be a pop star.
Yeah.
And
And why aren't I?
well, you
can't
are.
imagine. Cannot
You
imagine.
rapped at Le Web. So
Yeah.
tell us about Jukedeck.
Most importantly, my wife has now banned me from ever rapping again, which is why Hanadi had to play that on video and not have it live, I guess. So just after leaving here, I became kind of obsessed with the question, why can't computers write music yet? I couldn't really figure out what the answer was. I couldn't see any good reason why they couldn't, and I didn't really have a job at the time, so I thought I'd just kind of try it out. And so I started building a really simple at the time rule-based system to take my knowledge of music theory and composing and try to write the beginning were very basic, simple hymn tunes. And it took me about 1.5 years, and after a while it kind of got just about good enough that it wasn't totally embarrassing.
And I took it to some investors, Cambridge Enterprise actually, and they ended up investing in it. And at that stage, we managed to grow the team and hire much smarter people than me who could actually code and do things like machine learning. And we totally kind of revamped our system. And we now are a business that focuses on building neural network-based systems that compose original music note by note, chord by chord. And we do this to do two things. One, to provide backing music for video and games and things like that. Think kind of stock music, but the 21st century answer to that. And secondly, the thing that really drives us, which is we think that once AI can really understand the creative process in things like music, it will enable more people to use it as a tool in their own creativity, be that in making videos or be that in writing music. You know, once AI can actually understand music, we think that actually that can let a lot more people get into the music writing process, and it can be the next wave of musical tools after things like synthesizers and digital audio workstations. So we're excited about it for that reason, and that's what we do.
Great. Thank you very much, all three of you. So all three of you have something in common, where you had an idea, but you decided not to embark on the journey on your own. And all three of you at some point have used the word we, and we haven't started talking about the team yet. So do you want to tell us who's the we, and who were the original people there, who's the co-founder, and how you met them? And Jon, because you're grateful that I didn't play any embarrassing video, you're going to go first.
I'm waiting for any more surprises later on. So, yeah, well, I guess I graduated. I've been working in the civil service for, I guess, kind of a year or so when I had this idea, and I don't know, a friend from university was just visiting my housemate Ben Medlock, and I just kind of pitched the idea to him because I kind of knew of like two geniuses in like computer science in my network, and he was one of them. And his response was kind of, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I'll go away over the weekend and pull together a kind of demo." It turned out in hindsight that he was absolutely the right person to set this business up with, because he had a PhD in natural language processing, machine learning here. He was in a computational linguistics group here. And actually, even though I didn't know anything about those spaces or those technologies, if we'd gone ahead with some, I guess, classical kind of approach, it really wouldn't have been as impactful or valuable. And so I think really what Ben brought, which I didn't have, was a technical understanding, an ability to kind of build out prototypes using the right techniques, which at those stages had never really been applied on mobile, on smartphones before. So I think his first prototype was probably, 300 megabyte models. And I guess then we're getting the same performance from a 3 megabyte model is kind of non-trivial, and then translating that so that building a system which is generic enough, which can handle 200 languages. Those are the kind of challenges and technical challenges we're facing. And so I think really from the beginning, we were working on it together. We were kind of asking questions around technology, about business model, about approach. I took on the role really of, I guess, doing everything that wasn't coding, because I figured that was the kind of limited resource, and we had to have as much as possible of Ben's time building the actual tech. And so that meant everything from, doing the VAT return to trying to work out branding, naming, everything else. And I think that's kind of how our roles evolved. So he took CTO, I took CEO, but very much we worked closely in partnership throughout our growth. And really for 18 months, it was just me and Ben. We went through 2 or 3 pretty radical kind of iterations and prototypes before we came up with SwiftKey, kind of as you see it today.
Great, thank you very much. Dom.
So I suppose slightly differently to both of you guys, I was the co-founder rather than the original founder who had, I suppose it sounds actually, Jon, like yours was probably a little bit more collaborative from the start, whereas I think Ed will explain a slightly different situation to me. But Leo, whilst I was reading an incredibly useful and now everyday used degree in theology, my business partner Leo was reading a completely useless degree in business and economics and international finance at Manchester University. So there were some quite natural fits at the beginning. He came up with all the ideas in the business model. I made lunch. And we kind of worked out our roles from there. I had a weird background. Whereas most people go spend if they take a gap year from between school and university, which sort of seems to be increasingly popular, most people tend to go and earn a little bit of money working somewhere for a mate's mum or dad, or in a supermarket or something, I decided I wanted to sell Sky door to door, which is, looking back, a stupid thing to have done. But it did mean that when we sat down together and were faced with having to go and get our first pub customers on board, we knew what the business model was going to be. That was something which I had a bit of experience in. I knew how to sell. So to begin with, I think for that first 18 months, it was really doing, much like Jon said, in terms of the business thinking and everything like that, it was very, very collaborative. We'd go for walks, we'd sit down, we'd have lunch, we'd have a cup of tea, we'd do all that kind of stuff. But then in terms of the actual execution, Leo dealt a lot more on product and development, whilst I was out kind of trying to get interest, get people using, getting people to use this minimal viable product which he was developing. And it kind of developed just like that until probably about 2 years in, where we suddenly then had enough pubs using the platform that someone really needed to think about what the business plan looked like and how we were going to execute it, what the sales strategy was going to be like, whether we were going to have a team that was going to help to build them out, how we were going to get brands involved, how we were going to monetize, all that kind of stuff. And so naturally, we kind of split the business at that stage between B2C and B2B, which in hindsight, I don't think was the right thing to do. I think we spent a year being quite siloed as partners, and as a result, the two products kind of developed in quite different ways. And we've actually spent a lot of time and energy really bringing the business back together. So we now work a lot more closely together on a day-to-day basis. But generally speaking, I look after any of the B2B propositions, so pubs, brands, etc. And then Leo looks after strategy and products. We have a great guy that we hired about 4 months ago who looks after all of our B2C proposition. But I think the one thing to say about co-founders, and I'm sure that Ed will say the same thing, and I expect Jon will, is that I think that the success we've had and why we're still here 6 years later is that having been at school together, there's an incredible implicit trust that we have. We're able to be quite frank and honest with each other. So even though we really didn't have skills per se that were obviously going to help us delineate what the roles are in the business, we knew that we'd be able to work it out together. Ed will probably be the same, but I guess it'd be interesting hearing from Jon what you think, because it's a very, very different situation for you.
So Dom, there wasn't some kind of weird dating going on between Manchester Business School and the theology department at Cambridge University. You actually knew your co-founders before your co-founder before you went to read theology in Cambridge.
Yeah. So I, whilst all of my friends at St John's were getting jobs in their last year, I was busy trying to wrap my head around how to run a May ball, and left university with no jobs or offers or anything. But I did have a holiday booked in France with Leo, and he promised me that he was going to give me lots of rosé. So yeah, a couple of gallons later, and I agreed to go and work with him setting up his sales strategy for 2 weeks. And it's been an incredibly long 2 weeks.
Great.
So that was that.
Thank you. Ed.
Yeah, so my co-founder is brilliant. This is not the first business that we have set up together. The first bit, so he was actually not only at university with me in the same choir, singing the same voice part, but we actually were both choristers at King's when we were 8 years old. So we've really known each other for a very long time. And the first business we set up with each other was it was called the Camden Choral Collective, and it was an a cappella group for the grime scene. And it was obviously a total flop, because it turns out that the likes of Dizzy Rascal didn't need a bunch of posh boys singing really embarrassing close harmony music. But we basically got really distracted because while we were here at King's, we got asked to do one very big gig, and we thought, wow, there must be a market here. And got obsessed with it, and we got business cards printed and everything, and I've still got them somewhere. And we never got a second gig, sadly. But so that was great fun. But then when I was doing kind of other stuff, I then started Jukedeck, and as Dom hinted at, I actually started on my own. And actually, when people ask me, what's the biggest thing you've learnt from your startup, it is this question, the importance of your co-founder. And the reason I know that so well is because I, for so long, didn't have one. I was because this thing was, you know, Ben, I'd love to get your take on how you viewed what you were doing, but because I saw this as kind of a big long-term project, and I didn't really know how long it would take building a computer that could write music, I was very secretive about it at the start. I took a view that I wouldn't take today. And I didn't really tell many people I was doing it. Pretty much just my girlfriend knew what I was doing. Even my parents didn't know what I was doing. And that kind of made me work on my own for a while. And it probably slowed down the progress at the start. So I was building this thing on my own. And that means that kind of my first business plan was just not what we're doing today at all, because I hadn't really thought about that side of things. I was building the tech. And then luckily, because we were good friends, me and Paddy, I was round to dinner at his flat. And we, again, had quite a lot of rosé, I think. It was probably a similar start to you. And I ended up telling him what I was working on. I had an app on my phone at the time, and this is the kind of commercial thinking that I'd come up with. It was literally just an app, and you pressed play, and it would play music at you. I didn't really have much of an idea commercially. And I played it to him, and he was suitably impressed, which was really nice. And he'd gone off to work at Google at the time, and he was striking video partnerships there. And he suddenly said, "This is really cool. Have you thought about using it to provide backing music for the massively booming YouTuber world?" And I said, "No, not at all." And he said, "Okay, cool, I'll come and help you do that." And we actually left it a little bit of time, because I didn't really have much money at the time. And he got free lunches at Google, and I really took advantage of them for quite a while. But eventually, he jumped ship there, came on board full time, and became my co-founder. And even though I'd been doing it a while, he really has been my co-founder, because there wasn't much of a sort of business before him. It was more of a research project. And the way we've divided our roles as well has kind of changed. When we started, it was just 4 of us. We hired a couple of engineers, and Paddy did all of the operations side, all the business side, totally himself. And I was focused actually still on building the tech. I did the kind of lowest level of our system. How do you build a rule-based system to compose music? But as soon as we managed to grow enough to hire some machine learning researchers who took that over from me and did it much better than me, I then kind of started doing more of the day-to-day stuff that is more typical of a CEO. And so that means today that Paddy and I actually share a lot of the work between us, and really are a team, and kind of just like we're almost interchangeable in what we do. And it has just been, I imagine, like you, Dom, absolutely amazing to start a business with someone who you know so well. I mean, you know, he was my best man at my wedding, that sort of thing. And just that kind of, and maybe there are problems with that as well. I think we've definitely been guilty of, especially in our early days, not necessarily having the kind of radical transparency that you need, you know, to be able to tell the other person when they've screwed up, that kind of thing, which is really, really important. We're doing a lot better now, but I think there was kind of a year or so when everything would be very rose tinted, and we'd say, "Oh, you're doing great," and they'd go, "Yeah, you're doing great too," and we'd probably both go away and be like, "Oh my god." And we're really good at that now. I think we're getting better anyway. But it's just been absolutely amazing starting it with someone you know that well, just because you are, I guess, you kind of know how the other person is thinking. God, you don't need to do this, but that's been a really good thing, I think, about our co-founding a business.
Jon, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think just building on what they both said, I mean, I think almost by luck, and I don't think I had the kind of same depth of maybe friendship starting out with Ben, but we were in the same mutual friendship group. We kind of knew each other from uni. But I think we just from day one had that trust of an ability to kind of work well together. And I think for people here thinking about setting up businesses or already in businesses, I think that relationship is at the core of pretty much everything that happens thereafter. And I kind of knew if Ben said to me that he's going to do something, he'd do it. And because I knew that he was incredibly talented, he'd do it kind of as good as I could do it, even better. And in many of the things he was doing, I couldn't do any of them at all anyway. So I think we very much had complementary skill sets, but we also both had a very high standard, and we both kind of trusted each other. So we work flexibly, but also I think when you have that responsibility that you're going to let someone else down if you don't do what you've said you'll do, I just don't think I could have had the same motivation to do it on my own without that kind of relationship. And I think that same trust, as you start hiring your team and you're building up your core team, the way that you work together as co-founders, I think does influence the way that the culture of the company starts to form. And I think, for example, like we work pretty flexibly. We had a few core days in the office, but we were also able to work at home. That kind of behavior that we had together then kind of flowed into the business as we started hiring people.
So I am pretty sure that in the audience there are some people looking for co-founders. I'm not opening to questions yet. So there are people who are, looking for co-founders. And I think that you've given two very different views. One is the interchangeability, as Ed put it, and the complementarity of skills that you have. Is there one way, one right way, or are there more? Dom, given that you didn't give...
I find it very hard to imagine that there is a right way to do it. I think, I think a lot of people when they're starting a business, we certainly did, we underestimated how massive that relationship was going to be, not just for the work that we did, but for our whole lives. I mean, it's like, I have a similar kind of like depth of relationship with Leo as I have with my fiance. I spend more time with him than I do with my fiance. And, as a result, I think when you're looking for a co-founder, you really have to plan kind of, it's like planning for marriage. It's not planning for a few dates. This is, when I know this person with all of their flaws and all of their strengths and everything about them, am I still really going to want to work with them and build something really exciting? And, I think trust is a word that Jon used, which I think is totally right. And then I think shared vision. Vision is obviously, a word that gets used a lot in business growth at the moment. But I think it's so important. And I don't think Leo and I really had that for the first 2 or 3 years of our business. I think we were just kind of messing around, actually, to what I said. But there was a real turning point where we did sit down and had a really frank conversation, a candid conversation, to use one of your words, kind of conversation about what it was that we both thought the business was going to look like in 5 or 10 years' time, what we thought it needed. And we had to have some quite difficult conversation. We disagreed on a lot of stuff, but we were able to have that conversation and accept that whilst we disagreed, we still loved each other. And we still wanted to make this, I can't stress how much, it is like a marriage, we still wanted to make it work. And that was a real turning point for us when we really kind of aligned on what it was that we were trying to achieve together. So in terms of processes and models, I suspect that that's probably a lot more important. I don't know whether either of you guys disagree.
Yeah, I mean, no, I agree. I think the thing for me is that it's kind of changed over time in a way. I mean, so Jon, what you were saying about kind of complementarity, I totally agree. And so for me and my co-founder, it was very like that at the start. I mean, we were doing totally different roles and we had totally different skill sets. I knew loads about music theory, and that was basically it, which isn't ideal for most jobs, but was quite handy for this one. And he'd been working at Google for a couple of years and was brilliant. He was already great at management. He was great with people. He understood the process of a business. He'd done sales, all of these things that I just never even thought about having gone down the composing route. So at the beginning, we were very kind of complementary. And I think what's happened, I don't know if this happened to other people, over time, as our kind of roles have changed, I feel like we've both maybe learnt quite a lot from each other. I mean, I'm not sure how much he's learnt about music theory from me, but I've certainly learnt a lot about how you should actually run a business and process and that kind of thing, and sales and business development and all of this stuff from him. And I think that's why our roles have become more as one sort of hive mind. I mean, we're not quite like that, but we're a bit, we really chuck stuff at each other and just say, look, you've got more time this week, could you do this? And it's actually really helpful that we have become a bit more like that, I think.
Great. So I'm going to open the floor, the question to you. I'd like you, please, to introduce yourselves for the sake of radical transparency. I'm using your words, Ed. So who you are and what's your role, what's your job title, if you have one, or if you're a student, so that the panel knows who they're. So I think we've got one here.
I'm Richard Parkins, and I've been involved in 2 startups. And the question I'd like to ask, particularly Ed, but possibly other panelists as well, is when you're at the very beginning of your process, you haven't got anything to sell, you haven't got anything very exciting to pitch to investors, how do you fund yourselves? How do you live until you've got something that you can either sell or pitch to investors? Because that's a very important problem for a startup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So as I say, I went about 1.5 years working on Jukedeck before we had any money. And what did I do? I mean, I was maybe a sort of very specific case. I basically tried to use whatever talents, limited talents I had to make as much money as I could. So I was singing around London in several choirs that you've probably seen. I was singing at St Paul's Cathedral, which was one of them, but a bunch of others. Temple Church pays the best if anyone's ever looking for that kind of work. It was really great money. It was hard giving that one up. I was doing a bunch of journalism, and what on earth else was I doing? I was basically just doing odd jobs here and there, and scraping through and really not making very much money. But you know, it's that's almost the best stage of a startup, isn't it? That idyllic bit when you're just like, oh my God, we're going to change the world, and no one appreciates it yet, but it's going to be amazing. That's, you know, the kind of it's the bit you're working in your garage. So I think so. Anyway, what I did was I used the skills I had in order to work as much as I could while giving myself time. So, for instance, I would go and sing 2 services in St Bride's on Fleet Street. I think it's on Fleet Street, you'll know.
Also pays well.
Also pays really well, yeah. It's really. Did you do that one? Yeah, Dom did this as well. See, not all startups can start this way. And in the middle, I would go to the nearest coffee shop. There was a Costa just down the road, and I would sit there and work on the system I was building. So that's how I did it. I mean, I think there are lots of different ways, and I think there are lots of better ways now, frankly. I mean, it was a different world in 2010. I now look at things like Entrepreneur First that didn't exist when I was starting, but actually got some advice from the Entrepreneur First founders quite early on. And things like that now, and for those who don't know what Entrepreneur First is, it's a program that kind of takes people of any, I think, stage of life who, I think it's all technical people who don't have a startup idea yet, but they're just great people, smart people, and they bring them together and get them to form teams and get them to start startups. And there are lots of things like that around now, and I personally, if I were doing it again today, I would look more at those institutional things that are there to help you start up than living on the total breadline and singing for your supper, quite literally, I suppose. But that's how I did it. But I don't know how other people did it.
So you've just split the panel in 50 people who can sing for a living
Yeah.
and people who would be paid to shut up for a living. So thank you very much for
And maybe
that.
more.
And maybe
Exactly.
more. Let's take more questions about, you know, the bit that we've covered, and we'll have, you know, opportunity to do more. Yes, one here and one there. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Basil. I've started a couple of companies at an early stage. My question is, you've been obviously involved in your projects for quite some time. How do you see these projects and your startups as a way to express your creativity, or a kind of a long-term project that you want to kind of keep on going? You see what I mean? Would you going to work 4 or 5 years and then stop and do something else, or you want to keep going?
So, John, do you want to take this one?
Yeah,
And
well, it's a really interesting question, because I think fundamentally, I guess I felt like I was just having ideas all the time. And like when you're in a startup, you kind of have this, you feel like you can do anything, and you have this illusion of doing anything. But actually, you've got to be very, very disciplined and stay very, very focused on the area that you're working in. So I think the first probably 18 months, 2 years, I found I really enjoyed. And I think me and Bennett, like whiteboarding, we used to be driving back from Cambridge down the M11, like chatting in the car to London and coming up with ideas. And I think pretty much everything we came up with in those first 2 years then took, I don't know, 5 years to build. But like a lot of that creative process happened between us, and it was really exhilarating. And I think as the company grows, a lot of the things you do because you have to do them. Like you have to raise money, you have to sell, some of these things are fun, some of these things aren't fun. But a lot of it, I think, for me over time became more of a responsibility to lead the company, to help the company grow and scale. I ended up living out in the US for a few years, I referenced earlier. We were doing a lot of sales in Asia, so I love traveling, but when you're going out for a one-day meeting to whatever, like at the end of the day, it's business travel, you just pop to Korea and back again. Like that kind of stuff isn't fun, it's challenging, it's not creative maybe. And so I think my personal experience was that I felt over time I did lose some of that creativity, but I think the culture in the company had to be a creative culture. And we're obsessed about the fact that we had to be innovating, we had to be pushing the boundaries. Like we're trying to build a keyboard. Like Google have got an amazing team building a keyboard, Apple have got an amazing team building a keyboard, Microsoft have an amazing team building a keyboard, unless we're innovating and challenging ourselves, we're going to be behind the kind of state of the art. So I think even if you personally, your role changes, I think you have to find a way for the organization itself to be creative, to be disruptive. And I think just to be open, I mean like a couple of ways along our journey. we did attempt various things that we then didn't actually kind of release. And we came back again and again to the fact we had to stay focused. We had to just do this one thing very, very well. But I think we had the creative urge as a team and as a company. But I think if we'd maybe had more conviction, or maybe, I don't know, our revenues were 10 times what they were, we may have gone off and pursued some other opportunities as well.
And I think, I don't know whether you've found this, but it's almost necessary to give up some of your creativity as a founder or a co-founder, because I think the temptation is, I'm sure there are lots of people that have done this successfully, but I think people in your business can find it very stifling if you're the one always coming up with all of the big creative ideas. And founders are naturally creative people. They've come up with something and they've taken that really brave step to create a MVP. And you can see, I think every founder, I don't know whether you guys have this, but every founder, as far as I'm aware, goes through that process of having to give up influence in what the creativity leads to and empower people around you. You talked about culture, Jon. Creating that creative culture almost becomes more of your job than coming up with the ideas yourself. And that's what you found.
Yeah, right.
So I know there was a question here, but I think we're going to carry on with, we'll reopen in 5-10 minutes to questions. So very nice segue into the next question, which is, at the beginning, I'm sounding, almost like in the Bible, at the beginning. So there were 2 of you, and then there were 4. So how do you go from a founding team to employee number 1, for instance? And I'm looking at you, Dom, just simply because of the theological segue. So.
Okay, yeah. So we, again, kept talking to people about our ideas, and I think that the thing that we perhaps just stumbled across accidentally was the fact that generally in startups and small teams, lots of people need to be able to do lots of different things. I think someone was telling me, a guy that works at a company called Huddle, which is a kind of sports data science company. He talks sort of about how they are desperately searching for people with what they call a T structure in terms of their skill set. I don't know whether anyone's familiar with this, but the idea is that you have a broad range of skills across the top, and then you have one thing that you're a real expert in, almost kind of world class at. And I think in early stages of startups, you've got a really difficult balance between those 2 things. Am I looking for something ultra specific, the best back-end developer I can possibly find, or am I looking for someone that can do a bit of business development, a bit of account management, some sales, some business strategy, all that kind of stuff? In our case, Leo and I were both really struggling to engage our fan community because we were naturally a little bit more business-minded. So we happened to have a friend of a friend who was really good at writing, had a great tone, wanted to be a sports journalist, and said, look, actually, we'd really like you to come in and just write some blogs for us. He started writing some blogs, and he published them, and a couple of people found them quite funny and started sharing them. We thought, this guy's quite good. And then we said, actually, would you like to write a few more blogs? And then would you like to take over the Facebook advertising? And then would you like to kind of engage our Twitter community and so on? And it kind of naturally morphed into something where suddenly, Pete is his name, he was, employee number 3 almost by accident. And whereas he, in his T structure, he is a fantastic writer, which is still important for us now. He has had to develop over time this range of broad skills across the top, like digital marketing and engagement and data analysis. And therefore, I think looking back on it, the reason why we stumbled on it was we just found a great character, someone that was really willing to chip in, again, was candid with his feedback, told us when he didn't like what we were doing, explained why. And I think the same kind of rules apply to the ones that Jon was explaining with trust with your co-founder. You've got to have someone that you can trust and leave something to and feel completely confident they're going to do it. And in our experience, that was almost always through our own network, because we didn't have money to pay recruiters 20% of a salary up front. We didn't have that cash lying around. So we had to just ask mates whether they knew anyone that knew someone who could do this thing that we thought we needed. And gradually that network moved out and out and out. And we still employ that tactic today. We try not to use recruiters at all. We always try to look to our network to say, we've got this role. Do you know someone that would like our culture and would like our company? And do they have some skills and are they willing to learn and develop? So that's kind of, we stumbled across it by accident, but that's still very much what we do now.
Ed?
Yeah, just to pick on that, I think also one of the reasons MatchPint I think has done very well and been very kind of lucky in recruiting is that you found, and it hasn't been hard for you, I think, to find people who are passionate about what you do, right? Like in your circle of friends, there's just a lot of people who want to help you do what you do, right? Which is why you've managed to hire a few people there, which is awesome, I think. Yeah, and it's kind of been the same for us, but a bit different. So actually, our first employee did come through a recruiter. Johnny, he's now our chief architect. He's an amazing engineer. He now is managing people, but he'd done 1 year in industry. And he, in fact, like this recruiter, and we use recruiters sometimes. I actually got a box of chocolates from Johnny's recruiter just today. We've never used the same recruiter again, which I feel really bad about because Johnny is absolutely amazing. But I think, and I won't say who this recruiter is, they didn't necessarily do a great job of selling the company to him. He turned up for interview, and he later told us that he almost didn't bother turning up for interview because the recruiter had done such a bad job of explaining to him what our company actually did. To be fair, people often have trouble explaining what a company actually does. But he thought, well, I just don't get this at all. It was in the days before AI music was kind of more popular, but he came along to interview, and then we chatted to him, and I guess some of our passion came across, and he is a musician who had built sort of production systems before, and was like, oh my God, this is amazing, I want to come work here. And so did, and has become such a key part of what we do. And I guess that's how we hired our early people, but also how we kind of still focus on hiring. I think it's about figuring out, because all startups will have this, right? There will be people who are passionate about what you do. For us, that is generally people who both love things like machine learning and are probably like semi-professional musicians. And there aren't that many of them, but when we find them, they tend to be really passionate about what we do. And we put a lot of effort into finding those people and engaging with them and chatting to them, and chatting to people like Johnny. And that's kind of how we do it.
Great. So, Dom, I think you've got 12 employees at the moment, 18 at Jukedeck, if I'm correct, and SwiftKey at the end had 140. Do you apply the same rule for employee number 1 as employee 140, John?
Again, there's probably 1,000 different answers to this. I think
your answer.
In our case, no, because I think by that stage, the hiring was done by those different parts of the company. But I think we had a much more developed recruitment process and going through to kind of get the bar high before we even kind of started interviewing people. I think I agree with these guys that said, I mean, in the earliest days, we didn't really kind of have a brand, we didn't have a product, people didn't know about us. And so what we did was just look at our networks again. And so I think Ben, after his PhD, had been working for Alexia, a Cambridge-based kind of consultancy, had done some interesting projects for another startup. There was a very, very good developer there, a CTO of that company that had recently been sold. Ben managed to persuade him to join us as our kind of chief software architect. And we knew that we had to basically productize this prototype code to have any chance of kind of selling this stuff to phone manufacturers. And I think by bringing someone quite experienced early on, he already had some pretty strong views on how he wanted to work. So for example, he said to us, look, I'm not going to join you unless you commit to having your engineering team in one location. Now, whether that's right or wrong, that for us became like a part of the mantra that we wanted to have a kind of single culture that our engineers would work together, collaborate together. We wouldn't have kind of split sites of engineering. I'm not saying there aren't other ways of doing it. And then also he had another mantra, which is like, just the bar was incredibly high, and particularly for the kind of the first few hires. And so we then kind of built a team, partly from people that he knew, but also from, I don't know, top grads that were coming out of Cambridge, where if you're able to hire, I don't know, really the very, very top of a year group in engineering or computer science, I think our first kind of 10 employees became just an amazing team. And I think that then keeps the bar high the whole way through. Now, by the time we get to kind of 140, by then, I guess our brand was known. We had a lot of inbound interest, people applying to us. We then had, I don't know, telephone interview screening, first of all, to make sure people were kind of some level of cultural normality of fit. Then we did kind of Codility online testing, which got probably filtered out 90% of people. We then had a range, because we knew every single candidate we'd ever applied, had ever accepted, was within a certain score range. They'd then have an in-person interview in the company, interviewed by peers to make sure they'd fit in with that team culture. And then another manager would be hiring and to look at kind of fit from a cultural perspective. So over time, that's not appropriate when it's just two of you. Like at that stage, it's kind of like, who's the most amazing person we can possibly persuade to be stupid enough to join us? And like making sure that's the right person. And you can't, you can't get those kind of early hires too wrong, but also the people that are insane enough to join you at that stage are normally doing it because they really, really believe in what you're doing. And so actually, they tend to be with you a long time, they share your passion, they build a company with you. Like, pretty much anyone that joined our company could have earned a lot more working in a different job, or working in the city, whatever it might be. They cared about what we were doing because it was a big problem. It really annoyed them that their keyboard was really terrible. And it's a really, really hard problem. It seems easy that you can kind of type on your phone and you get instantaneous predictions. What people don't realize is you basically scrape the entire internet, model language from 1 trillion words to work out word combinations, and then you've made it kind of operate on a memory-constrained device quicker than the time it takes you to notice that kind of that prediction is coming up. And so like that problem is interesting for a lot of people, and it gets interesting when you're trying to do kind of more and more advanced techniques.
So when do you know, so do you have processes now at 18, or are you still using your network and you got instant, and who's crazy enough to join you?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. Yeah, so we do now have processes in place, but yeah, as Jon said, we didn't at all at the beginning. I mean, one thing, I mean, so it sounds like we have a lot of the same processes. I think, you know, those, you know, you have a quick phone interview, you do some technical interviews, you have a culture interview. We've tried to get much better about it. One thing actually that we found, I don't know if you found this as well, really suffered from the, you know, because I think that thing is pretty constant across startups. The fact that at the beginning you're basically just interviewing people, and you know, for us it was, we would go to certain universities and try to talk to their best researchers and then try to hire those people basically. One thing that really suffers from that actually is diversity. Suffers in a massive way because you're just not at that stage where you're really thinking about that. You're thinking, this person's amazing, how do I hire them? You're not doing things like opening up a fair process to the wider world, and there are things you can do, like make sure the language of your job applications doesn't mean that only a certain subsection of society applies to you, right? Like if you put in your job application, we're a great startup and we have pizza and beer every Friday, then there's a certain kind of person who applies to you and a bunch of other people don't, and there's great data on this. So one thing we've just tried to do actually is we've just literally last week massively updated our hiring process to take in a bunch of best practices around what you can do around this kind of thing. And I think when you have a more stringent process where you say these are literally the steps that we follow for everyone who is going to apply to this job, and it's going to start with a phone interview, but it's going to start even before then when we're putting the job ad out. We're going to run every bit of text we put out in a job ad through. There are online tools you can run them through to check you're having kind of decent language to encourage diverse applications. You can sign up to things like the Rooney Rule, where you interview or at least consider a certain number of people from more diverse backgrounds. All of these kinds of things you can do. And so that's one thing actually that has changed over time for us. We started off hiring just musicians. We've just relaxed that rule. So I think we've had our first people who wouldn't necessarily call themselves semi-pro musicians join the team. They're in the minority at the moment, but we're hoping to expand that. But also trying to put these processes in place. I think it's a really important thing. You get great applicants through doing it. I think you're pretty privileged if you're in a position where you can hire people and you can try to make that kind of difference. So that's one thing that I think we've learned.
Brilliant. Dom?
Well, we had just building on that, we had a really interesting, we work out of a co-working space in London called Huckletree. And one of the perks of being at Huckletree is that every Tuesday morning they get a really interesting person to come and talk over breakfast, and they put breakfast on and one of the most interesting ones that we had was the head of talent at Shazam came and talked over breakfast, and she just completely changed the way in which we thought about how you hire people, but really spoke to us about the challenge that we had, which was we don't want to spend a lot of money on recruitment. And we asked her this question, how do you combine this thing? She said what she did at Shazam is she started right at the top. So Shazam now I think has about 200 employees, but when she came in there were about 100. So it started right at the top with the founding team in the C-suite and said, you've got to create a culture of recruitment within your business. And that starts from explaining to every person in your business that every single conversation they have, whether that is at the pub, they meet someone new, they're invited around for dinner at someone's house, they sit next to someone at a gig, they are at a networking event, every single person that you speak to could know someone that eventually might apply for a job in your business. And you've got to think really, really carefully about what image you are portraying of your business to everyone that you talk about. And one of the things that does, if you get it really, really spot on, is you get people talking about it. And people say, God, Jon's got this. I met this guy called Jon the other day. He's got an amazing business called SwiftKey. Have you heard of it? No, I haven't. Okay. Oh, right. You know, I know a developer that's amazing and is really interested in that kind of thing. Okay. Oh, let's make that connection. I had a really interesting dinner. I was introduced to this guy called Ed the other day, and he's fascinated by music and AI composing. And one of the things that we found very difficult is when we were kind of 5, 6 people, we were all talking about the business in quite different ways. We all had kind of our own spin on it or our own personal story, which was great. But actually really kind of codifying it and saying, this is the image that we want to portray about MatchPint to everyone that we speak about. This is the common story. This is the common vision. This is the mission. These are our belief systems. It just means that comes across much more consistently across the board. And it means that every single time that we're looking for a role, it starts with me and Leo actively reaching out to our network and making it very clear to every single person within our business that we're reaching out to our network, whether that's a public LinkedIn post, an email that we send round to say, hey, look, someone's just responded. And that has slowly created this, kind of snowball effect of everyone in our business always, whenever we have a job coming up, going like, oh, I might know someone in my network that's really interesting that we should talk to. But it took a lot of effort to get that ball rolling, but we're really starting now to see the benefits of that probably a year on from that breakfast.
Okay, thank you. So, second break for questions. There was a question with the gentleman here that we didn't have a chance for. Could I just remind you to introduce yourself first? Yes.
Hello, my name is Cody. I work in network analytics. So having received my illegal cease and desist several years ago, after failing to get copyrights and things on a name, basically, my question to you would be, Ed, you spoke to wanting to be very secretive about your ideas. At what point, pardon me, at what point do you start talking more openly about it, and when should you start getting legal protections in place for your startups?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, maybe 2 parts to that question. I mean, in terms of when you should start talking about it, I have totally come around to the point of view, and other people may disagree, that you should basically do it from day one. Had I spoken to more people and been more transparent about what I was doing, what was I worried about? I was worried that someone else would come and copy my idea. That was ridiculous. I wasn't the first person to think of doing AI music. People have been trying it since the 1950s. People were trying it at the time. I just didn't happen to know about them. But I mean, basically, any decent idea, I've heard, kind of as a rule of thumb, you should assume if you have a good idea, 10 other people in the world are working on it at least at the same time. Even if you think it's absolute genius, like other people are doing it. Because where do ideas come from? They almost certainly come from, you putting a few different things together that you've maybe read in the news or studied, and there'll be other people like that. So I tend to now be of the belief that you should talk to people immediately. Why? Because you learn a huge amount. You get so much. I would have learned earlier that I should have had a co-founder. I probably would have earlier thought maybe I should go and hire someone or try to hire someone doing machine learning, that kind of thing. And I think it helps you speed up. And speed is so important in startups. So maybe there are businesses where you want to kind of fly under the radar. Maybe you've got 100 million in funding secretly, and then you want to do a big launch. But it's going to be pretty rare. And for me, yeah, but in terms of legal protection, that's another thing. I mean, names, I wouldn't worry too much about. This is my third name for the company. There were 2 names before we settled on Jukedeck, and we only settled on Jukedeck because the .com was available. And Jukedeck's a terrible name because everyone says, how's Jukebox going? And I've just I've stopped correcting them. I just say, yeah, it's going great, thanks. But basically, people come to know your name. Most names are awful, and as soon as it's out there in the you have a story about names. I think your name, which I'll leave to you, about your SEO. In the beginning, weren't you second on the list after sort of MatchPint?
Oh yeah, we kept on getting we got like Google thinks that you mean people would search MatchPint and it would say, did you mean MatchPoint? And actually even today we've just brought in a new pub customer, and we're having to my accounts team are having to ring round 100 different pubs in the middle of nowhere to train them on how to use MatchPint. And we're a little bit behind schedule, so I offered to help out the team and make a few calls. And as soon as I said, hi, it's Dom here from MatchPint, can I speak to Kay? She said, we don't need any paint. was like, what? MatchPint, pint of beer, that's what you do, you're a pub, you do that. So no, we don't need any paint. Oh, tennis, MatchPint. So the day that the story that Ed's talking about, it took us about 18 months, and Leo and I were there at the computer, and Peter just started working for us. And I think it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we searched MatchPint in our own Google, and it just came up MatchPint. And we just walked out of the office and went for a pint. And I just thought, that we've made it. That is, if nothing else, we've beaten tennis.
Yeah.
John,
I remember that day.
so,
So
John,
maybe
from a
few,
previous
yeah.
panel, I remember you have a story also with the name.
I've got lots of stories about namings. It depends which one you want to share. I mean, I think...
Which one do you want to share?
Let me take the broader question first. I think it's important. I think, I don't know. There's many different ways to do this. I think probably where I've come to is like there's a difference between saying what you're doing in terms of like, hey, I'm trying to make typing better on your phone. And as you're saying, there are 50 people out there that are already doing that. I don't think at the point we were doing it, anyone was doing the technology that we were building. And it was very, very unique, very, very differentiated. And it probably took 3 years before anyone came close to trying to use some of the stuff that we were doing. So there's a big difference between kind of describing in a non-threatening way what you're doing and telling someone how you've done it. I think when you then start looking at IP and patent filing, then clearly you have to reveal your system, your method. But again, I mean, it stays secret for, what, 18 months before you file a PCT and it goes out more widely. So we took the view that I'm probably naturally kind of like you. I was like, look, I don't want anyone to know what we're doing. But it didn't mean we weren't saying we're working on keyboards. We just kind of kept kind of some of the details a bit kind of under wraps. When you go public and you've got a product out there, everyone knows what you're doing anyway. And then you've just got to kind of run as fast as you possibly can. And so like we've got, I think, 30 patent families, 80 patents we had when we were acquired. And at the end of the day, we took the approach that had some value, but essentially the value it had was kind of a defensive counterweight. If someone ever sues you, you've got something to validate their patents. Like we weren't going to go out and take on some of the big tech players if they were. It's a massive legal battle that you need kind of millions and millions of dollars for. But what we were going to do was do our best job, make sure we protect ourselves and go as fast as we possibly could. And so I think it's a balance of these factors. On naming, just to kind of slightly counter this, like you get to a certain level when your brand's out there that you get squatters squatting your trademark in other countries. And so like, I don't know, China in particular is difficult on this. And we've had 2 or 3 cases where it ends up costing quite a lot of money. So I think in hindsight, I would have trademarked very much earlier on, particularly in China. And we have got trademarks for our patent, our logo in different jurisdictions. In terms of our name, I don't know which story it was, but I think like, look, we originally called TouchType. There was an app called TouchType. We couldn't call it TouchType. So then our prediction engine was called Fluency. So we thought, oh, we'll call our app like Fluency Mobile. And then one of our first early investors was a kind of guy at HTC who'd happened to come up with like the HTC brand and working on that side. And he's like, look, I'll invest, but your name's so terrible. Like, you've got to come up with a better name. And this was like January, and we're launching it end of February at Mobile World Congress, a big industry show. So it's 6 weeks to kind of get a name together. So he gave us like HTC's branding company as a favor, kind of helped us out with some brainstorming and kind of naming. And like, again, we went for everything like, oh, we're like, okay, Wordflow, that sounds great. Like, it's about predictions, it's about predicting the next word. Let's go with Wordflow. But kind of Microsoft had that trademark on that, so we couldn't use that name. And so we're going down to Exeter, where our design company was, and the only name we could come up with was kind of ThoughtStream, which is like an evolution of Wordflow. And the branding they did, it kind of, probably in hindsight, it's more like a kind of sanitary product. It just was terrible. The colors, the name, the wording, it just was not tech at all. But we came back from this meeting going, okay, well, it's the best we come up with. We just have to stick with it. We've got 1 week to go. We're about to launch at Mobile World Congress. It's going to be ThoughtStream. And then basically we got back to London off the train after kind of a few hours on the train from Exeter, and the designer was like, I thought that was terrible. So I kind of SwiftKey and like did this logo. And that's where our name came from. And so I think, as you say, like eventually a name becomes something because of the value associated with it. And over time, a brand builds around it. Like, I don't think of SwiftKey as in like Swift keyboard, like, but when we're coming out with the name, you have all these naming, it just becomes, you just get so weird about it. So someone said to me, if you put your name and your brand in a paragraph in a press release, and you show it to 10 people, and none of them think that's really, really stupid, then you've kind of passed that test. But look, naming is probably one of the hardest things, and it's so, so subjective. But somehow you'll find the right one.
I think there was a question here. Yes?
Hi, my name's Mel, and I am starting a digital bank. Thank you. I'll say that again. Hey, my name's Mel. I'm starting a digital bank, and it's sort of underpinned by an AI-powered hedge fund. And it's kind of niche, sounds sexy, but at the moment it's just an idea on paper. And my friend Christina is being awfully generous with her time. So she's been wonderful with bouncing ideas around, and she's been helping me to... she's been kicking my ass basically and making me do stuff. So I quit my job on Thursday, so that's a tick off the list.
Congratulations.
Thanks. But I know that I need to find a team, but because my industry is so niche, the people that I would need to be co-founders would need to have knowledge of funds. They'd need to know the ins and outs of what a digital bank is, licensing and regulatory, all this sort of stuff. And therefore, I can't really just tap my existing friends or people that I guess are in very well-paid jobs just yet. And I feel like I need to get some more traction before I be able to attract a suitable co-founder. So maybe this one is for you, Ed. But do you feel that because you spent a while developing your product, you were then able to go to your wonderful, talented friend and say, actually, I have this idea, it's not stupid, do you want to join? And perhaps he wouldn't have joined if you hadn't have made that investment. That's kind of where I'm at. And also my second question is, in lieu of having a co-founding team, what I'm doing at the moment is just getting a portfolio of industry wizards, I guess, and people that are in these high-powered jobs and don't really want to leave, but would lend me like half a day to discuss my idea. Do you think that's sensible?
Yeah, I think that would Paddy have joined had I not built a proof of concept? I wouldn't like to speak for him. I wouldn't have been surprised if he hadn't. Yeah. He would have just said, "What are you talking about? Go and prove it first. I don't believe you." So yeah, I'm not sure he necessarily would have joined at that point, but I'm not sure. Having said that, I still think that, firstly, I'd sort of question how niche that is. I don't know enough about your industry, but if you're looking at it as something like fintech and hedge funds and that sort of thing, then arguably there's going to be a lot of people out there who are experts, not maybe that perfect crossover, but experts in different areas, and that's really what you need for a founding team. I personally would still think that depending on how capable of very quickly putting together a proof of concept or a prototype or a product or whatever it is you are doing that yourself, I would still massively recommend trying to figure out what areas of your business you are not good at, and there will be many, and it will be almost all of them, and that's how it should be. And starting to try to figure out what the most important things of that are, and starting desperately trying to figure out where those people come from. And it might be that you go to a bunch of fintech meetups in London or something. Just find the right meetups and go and chat to people. There are people doing these kinds of things but different. It's always unbelievably hard to find a co-founder, and I have been asked so many times by so many friends, this is what I'm doing. And usually it's people trying to find a technical co-founder, and oh my God, you just kind of think, I don't know. You just have to kind of get lucky in a way. But I can't help thinking, and people may disagree, that just going and talking to people, figuring out what you're bad at, going and talking to people, trying to find people who might be on the same page as you, but have that complementary skill set, is the most important thing you can do. And finally, I'd say I had a bunch of those advisors in the first instance. They were unbelievably helpful. I had my now father-in-law who'd started a business before. He helped me with a business plan. I had some patent attorneys working with me for free at the start. That was amazingly helpful. And that helped me get my first round of funding with Cambridge Enterprise. I went in and I had these people's faces on a screen, and they wouldn't have invested had I not had them there. They were brilliant, but it would have been even better had I had someone to actually bounce those ideas off and to do those things with me. And so I can't recommend enough finding that person to start it with, but it's really bloody hard. I don't know if people disagree or agree, maybe.
We all agree.
Sounds like they agreed. Good. Fine.
So it's a perfect segue to my next question, Ed, which is, who is helping you?
who is helping us, me?
You as a founder.
Yeah, this is a really good question. We were speaking about this beforehand. So one of the things as a founder you find, and you others may find as well, I'm not sure, is that your team grows and you're kind of starting to manage more people, and then you have the people you manage who are managing other people, and you develop this structure. But then really the only people you're sort of reporting to are your board. You might meet every month, every 2 months, whatever it is, and that's great, but it's not enough. And especially for people like, I think, all of us who have never started a business, unless you can count close harmony groups before, you've never really done this before. And I try to surround myself with people who have different skill sets and are very experienced. So we have a few advisors. I have 4 or 5 close advisors, just to give you an idea of who they are. We have one of the UK's leading music rights lawyers, who basically advises us on everything music rightsy, which is really important when you're making an AI that writes music copyright. It's really important that you understand that stuff. We have a guy who sold a previous tech company that did speech synthesis. He advises us on the business side. We have a guy who has been in charge of a company called The Foundry for quite a few years, who's just joined us as an advisor and helping us commercially. And then I have, and I'm probably forgetting people, but I have 2 people from my personal circle. My father-in-law, who was my first kind of helper, and I got very lucky. He started a publishing business, and so he had just started a business before, but also he cares about me as a person, because if I totally screw up, then his daughter's in trouble. And then actually I stole one of his advisors who helped him set up his business, and he's a venture capitalist in the US. So these are my kind of circle, without them I would have just totally given up after about 6 months. That's my personal take. I don't know about other people.
It's been a hot topic at MatchPint recently, because we do a book club at MatchPint, and everyone read Creativity Inc. recently, which I'm sure a number of people in the room will have come across. And it's one of the key ideas that Ed Catmull talks about there, the idea of having a brains trust that you can be totally open and transparent with, and you can call upon for difficult decisions when you don't know what the answer is, which, as Ed has certainly suggested, is most of the time when you have started a business. We were talking about this on the train on the way up, and I have found it quite difficult in the last 3 or 4 months, because as we have grown out our processes and we have much better management processes, and I've been learning about that, how to manage a team, how to develop people, how to understand their motivations, their ambitions, their development plans, and I've seen the positive effect it's had on them. I have felt a little bit left out because there's no one doing that for me. So recently I've been to someone who has been advising us since day one, really, who's the uncle of a really good friend of ours from school, who set up his own consultancy business. And I think for me, probably 2 years too late, I've now just asked him to become a more formal mentor for me, someone who actually cares and listens about a slightly more structured plan. But that's because naturally I quite like process and structure in a way that, for example, Leo doesn't. Leo is much more like Ed in the sense that he just has a group of people around him, including friends, business advisors, industry experts, who he'll just pick up the phone to and bounce some ideas off. Whereas I need to understand a little bit more where I'm going, and that's one of the things that I've really struggled with recently. So I'm really excited to see how that plays out over the next 12 months when I understand a little bit more about how I'm improving and where I'm going.
Just very quickly to add, I think the role of investors can also be quite important in how you found it. But I don't think we personally had any kind of formal advisors, but our investors were all informal advisors at different ways. And I think particularly the role of chairman, it's probably quite rare to have a chairman on very, very early, but our early angels kind of really encouraged us, and they had a kind of trusted friend, a guy, Mark Patterson, who'd been general legal counsel at Orange. And so he was our chairman, and for me personally, a very, very strong mentor for the first kind of few years. Like when you don't have a clue about anything to do with legal stuff and you're trying to negotiate with, I don't know, Motorola or Samsung about a big licensing contract, kind of having him alongside you on the phone call makes a really big difference. So I think having those people who you can almost grow into, and they kind of just like share their years and years of amazing experience and advice to, is really, really powerful. And whatever format that is, I think it can take many different forms, whether you have to pay for advice or it's people doing it over coffees, or whether it's investors or chairman. I think that can be really helpful.
We found it's really interesting when we first had our board and we first had our kind of round of, I suppose, close to institutional investment. We saw board meetings as a bit like a, kind of school report, where we would turn up and kind of had to present our work, and the teacher was going to tell us off if the answer wasn't right. And we totally forgot to embrace any of our vulnerability. My fiancée introduced me to someone called Brené Brown recently, who is just an amazing person to read and listen to. She's got a phenomenally well-viewed TED Talk about blame, shame, and vulnerability. And you forget that it's totally okay to not know the answers, and that, generally speaking, what I've found is that people want to help. They really like helping you out, particularly people, to your question, that maybe have a bit of a passion project that they can't do at the moment. I've just been amazed at how many people are willing and happy to give advice. But that advice is only there if you're vulnerable enough to acknowledge openly that you have a failing, and that there's something that you really don't know, or a skill that you don't have. Because if you're not making that clear, all of those people that are there and able to help you are not. So we've now finally changed that relationship with our board, where we tend to open up and say, really sorry guys, we don't know how to answer this. And they've become so much more productive. And the relationship that we now have with our investors is fantastic. And they have really helped us accelerate the way in which we work as a business.
So I'll go back to the number 12, 18, and 140. Big numbers, especially the 140. The role of the founding team must have evolved from when it was only the two of you or the four of you. So could you tell us a little bit more? Maybe Jon, do you want to start?
It's hard because it kind of blurs as the journey goes on, but I think we went from 2 to 10 pretty quickly, and then pretty much every year kind of doubled. And I think the thing that I'd struggled with was the fact that it was constant change. You just about solve what it looks like to run a 10-person or 20-person business, and then suddenly it's not right anymore. And so your roles are constantly evolving, and I think in hindsight I'd have prepared probably our team for the fact that their roles are changing all the time as well. I think what tends to happen over time is that people have to specialize more. And I think you, as a founding team, have to kind of offload more and more and more to other people, because there are some things as a founder you can't get away from. So you're always going to have to do board meetings. You're going to end up pretty much always have to do investment. There's always be some disaster with a customer you've got to deal with. There's some kind of crisis going on somebody. Ultimately, you've got to, staff you've got to deal with. So at a certain point, maybe kind of 80 to 100, we built another layer in, where I guess Ben then had a VP of Eng, had a product, I had a COO, a CFO, head of sales. And I think that was a very big shift, because suddenly we had people that came in, and I think we felt in a number of these roles we couldn't promote from within, and that may or may not have been the right call, but we had quite a junior team in a number of areas. And suddenly we kind of instilled a new group of people who were used to looking at a CEO meant something, a CTO meant something, a head of product meant something. Whereas for us before it was very amorphous, and we just kind of worked together collaboratively. And so I think for me and Ben, we felt we actually had to clarify our roles much more. We had to make it clearer what we were each responsible for. And so, for example, Ben was responsible for product decisions. That meant, because we respected each other, that he'd ask my opinion before he made the final call, but I'd allow him to make a decision I didn't agree with. But because I trust him, I knew that we'd at least work that through. And then similarly, he trusted me to make the right call in investment and, terms and who we were working with. So we kind of had to codify it a bit more, and that was between us, but it was also for the team. And so I think what happens is we felt we had to be clearer, we had to communicate more clearly, we had to not allow ambiguity, to allow people to kind of go to one of us and then back to the other and kind of play us off against each other. And that was at a certain level. I think from the journey prior to that, I guess I felt we were small enough that we could stand up and have a team meeting, and pretty much everyone would have enough context that most people could get all the decisions that are being made. Beyond maybe kind of 80-ish, I think the mantra of kind of repeat yourself 20 times and someone still won't have heard it. You've just got to repeat, and keep very, very clear in the mission, very, very clear in the strategy, and just keep going. And kind of offload some of that to the team around you, because ultimately every employee, every manager has to own that vision. It's not just you as founders. And I think some of those shifts are the things that went through as we grew.
Great. Thank you very much. Ed, the role of the founding team from 2 to 18.
Yeah, I mean, my role has changed hugely, and I think
I think that I found it pretty difficult actually, and I think your role especially changes. I mean, there are many other examples, but if you literally sort of build the initial code base, if you're that kind of founder, and that's the kind of founder I was, and there have been a couple of things that have been hard for me in that respect that have changed. So the first thing is, when we first had a couple of machine learning people on the team, and the moment when we decided to kind of switch over from the previous system that I'd built, that was rubbish, to the new system that they'd built, that was new and exciting, was doing some totally crazy things because it was machine learning, but basically amazing stuff. And that was kind of a hard process. And actually, for me, stepping out of the process of actually coding was one step. There was a massive change. There was a time when I was coding every day, which is ridiculous because I'm not a coder. But actually, the harder thing, and this I think probably applies to everyone, is what Jon was saying about sort of about kind of getting used to kind of delegating and not sort of micromanaging this thing that is essentially your baby. And I particularly had this with the research side of what we do. I'd stopped coding, but I was still leading our research team, and that kind of made sense because I had this kind of good understanding of music theory, and a lot of what we were doing was kind of based on music theory. But at the same time, we had more and more researchers and this bigger and bigger research team, and they wanted to work in a certain way, and I was kind of trying to impose this way of working on them that I think was very unnatural for how they were used to working. And part of the reason for this was that I was always very worried about kind of thinking, who are we going to find who has maybe quite a unique skill set of amazing machine learning capability and kind of amazing music theory capability, who can also manage a team. And I just thought we're never going to find this person. And we had loads of amazing engineers and loads of amazing people. We didn't quite have this person who kind of wanted to take the lead of this team. And essentially, what I think is kind of almost by luck, we eventually found them. And we hired someone to be a researcher who ended up being an amazingly good manager as well. And after a period of time, me and him sort of realized that he actually was in a place to take over this team. And at the moment I stepped out, it was really hard to do, and I found it difficult. But the moment I stepped out of managing the research team and let him do it, the research accelerated, and the research culture got better. We made innovations faster. I was able to go and focus almost 100% on things like investment and press and putting processes in place, and the other things the CEO of an 18-person startup should do. And yeah, that moment and finding that person, really that I think is the key. Finding the people whom you can know will really nail those things, and who really want to, and who you can totally trust to take over from you and do way better than you were ever doing, is I think the key to being in a management position in a startup.
Great, thank you. Dom, do you have anything to add?
I think just that as your role goes, you start doing less, and you start having to just spend most of your time solving problems. I think you become almost a full-time problem solver, or certainly in our case. Leo has a great view on this, which is, as a founder, you should look at a business problem that you have, try to understand it, and as quickly as possible ensure that you don't have to deal with it, either by hiring someone that is fantastic at solving that problem, or by finding a way to automate the solution that you've come up with. And that then allows you to understand lots of different bits of the business, because you can come and really try to get under the skin of a sales problem that you've got at the moment, or really try to understand a tech problem that you've got, or a code problem. And so if it's understanding and coming up with solutions to problems, I think you spend more and more of your time listening rather than doing, or at least that's how I've tried to approach the way in which my role has changed. So, I try to have a weekly catch up with every person that, one-to-one with every person that reports into me, where they set the agenda. I don't really say anything. They just come to me with an agenda and questions. And then a monthly catch up, one-to-one with every other person within the business. And it's easy when you're 12, you can do it when you're 140 and speak to everyone. But I was really struck by, really inspired by lots of business leaders and business books, but also really inspired by a guy called Stephen Goodyear, who until recently was the chairman of Young's Pub Company. They have about 140 pubs. He visited every single Young's pub at least once a year and had a conversation with the general manager in there. So that he was so close to what was going on the ground of his pub company that he was then able to take that, and on the the days when he wasn't visiting 140 pubs, he was able to just have so much more information at his fingertips to solve what were then the big problems. So I think increasingly at problem solving and listening as a means to answer those problems.
I think before we open for questions, we should thank you all three for being so open and for everything that you've shared. So thank you very much.